If God is good and God is all-powerful, then why is there evil? Why is there suffering? I mean, it's arguably the single biggest obstacle to faith for modern people.
It is. It's the question that just stops everything.
It does. And usually when you hear this discussed, you get these very complex, very philosophical answers that honestly leave you feeling more confused than anything else.
Absolutely. The technical term is theodicy, right? Justifying God's ways to man. And you're right. The answers are usually just intellectually exhausting. They feel like math equations trying to solve heartbreak.
Exactly. But today, we're doing something a little different. We're taking a deep dive into a lecture by the renowned theologian, Dr. J.I. Packer, called Providence and Evil. And this is where it gets really interesting because Packer doesn't just try to answer the question. He actually flips the whole thing on its head.
He does. His thesis is pretty provocative. He argues that the problem of evil, as we call it, is actually a uniquely modern problem.
Modern problem.
Yeah. He suggests that our struggle with it isn't because the world has gotten so much worse. I mean, history is full of horror, but because we've changed. Specifically, what we think we deserve.
That is a bold take. He basically calls modern society spoiled, doesn't he?
In a way, yes, but it's deeper than that. He's really diagnosing this huge cultural shift in our whole psychology.
Okay, let's unpack this then. We have a lot of ground to cover. We're going to get into why Packer thinks we're acting like, entitled children.
Right.
And why the standard intellectual answers fail. He calls it a graveyard of theories.
Yeah. And we have to talk about this really striking distinction he makes between holiness and happiness.
Oh, absolutely. And his practical advice, which includes this incredibly intense story about a rector in the 1940s, it just anchors the whole discussion.
It really does.
Okay, so let's start with this historical shift. Packer opens his lecture by saying that, 100 years ago, or really any time before the 20th century, Christians didn't see evil as a problem for their faith. That stopped me in my tracks. I mean, how could evil not be a problem? People were dying of smallpox, living through these brutal wars. Surely they noticed.
Oh, they noticed, for sure. But it didn't shatter their worldview. Packer's point is that a century ago, believers just accepted that the world was flawed.
Okay.
They operated under the doctrine of the fall, the idea that human disobedience broke the world. They just didn't expect life to be, as Packer quotes, a bed of roses.
So when something terrible happened, they didn't look up and say, hey, you broke the contract.
No.
So, well, of course, we broke the world. This is what happens.
Precisely. They viewed God in terms of holiness and justice, not just love. So tragedy was actually kind of consistent with their theology. It made sense in a world that had set itself against its creator.
But then comes the modern era, and Packer argues that this idea that's really more pagan than Christian has taken over. This is the Enlightenment, right?
Yes, that's the shift where humanity suddenly becomes the center of the whole story. The modern mindset expects God to act like what Packer calls an indulgent parent.
I love this analogy, even though it stings a little. He says, we expect God to be the parent who keeps the kids from any and all pain, gives them whatever they want, and has, zero standards.
And he asks you to think about what happens in a real family when you raise kids that way. If you shield a child from every consequence, give them every toy, they don't grow up happy.
No, they become spoiled.
They become spoiled. They never mature emotionally. They're just self-centered, shouting, give, give, give. And Packer's argument is that our society is now full of spiritually immature adults who feel this thing he calls cosmic resentment.
Cosmic resentment. Wow, that is a heavy phrase. It's that feeling of being personally offended that the universe isn't catering to you.
It's the direct result of that indulgent parent theology. If you believe God's only job is to make you comfortable, then pain feels like a total betrayal. But Packer says God would not be a good father if he spoiled us like that.
Right. A good father prepares his child for reality. He doesn't build a fantasy world around them. So we have this tension, the classic problem. God is all-powerful, God is good, yet evil exists. Packer notes that the problem vanishes if you deny one of those three. But the Bible insists on all of them.
Right. And to navigate that, he says we have to be super careful about our definitions. He spends a lot of time defining evil versus pain because they are not always the same thing.
This is a huge distinction for me. We tend to lump everything from stubbing your toe to moral corruption into the same big bucket of things I don't like. But he breaks it down. Evil is, morally bad wills, bad people doing bad things, and the waste of good potential.
Correct. That's true evil.
Yeah.
But then he gets to pain. And he challenges the whole idea that all pain is evil. He uses the example of our nervous system.
The finger in the flame, yeah.
Exactly. If you put your finger near a flame, your nerves scream at you. That pain is a positive good. It's a mercy. He mentions Hansen's disease, leprosy, where that pain signal is gone. And without it, people literally destroy their own bodies because they don't even know they're being damaged.
So pain is a guardrail. It preserves us. But what about the pain that isn't a warning? The deep, crushing kind? Packer has this very specific definition for when pain becomes evil. It's pain that cannot be handled creatively.
And this brings us to that story you mentioned. It's his answer to the idea that some pain is just pointless. He tells the story of a rector, a pastor in England, back in the 1940s.
You have to remember, this was before modern painkillers. Palliative care was basically non-existent.
Correct. So this man is dying of cancer, and Packer was told that the waves of pain were so severe the man had to literally stuff his bedsheet into his mouth to keep from biting his tongue off.
That is just a horrific image. It's the kind of thing that makes you question everything.
It is. But the story goes that in between those bouts of agony, whenever he could catch his breath, he would recite Psalm 34.
Wow.
I will bless the Lord at all times. His praise shall continually be in my mouth.
That seems almost impossible.
Packer's point, and it is a hard one, is that for a believer who is drawing on supernatural power, there is no pain so acute that it can't be handled creatively. He argues that even if all you can do is whimper, if your eyes are on God, that is handling it creatively.
It's the difference between pain leading to despair and pain leading to dependence.
Exactly. If the pain drives you to God, Packer argues it hasn't become evil in that ultimate sense. It hasn't destroyed you spiritually.
Okay.
And this leads him to just tear down the way intellectuals usually try to solve this problem. He calls it the graveyard of intellectual solutions.
He goes through this whole list of famous theories, theodicies, and just explains why they all fall short. It's like a rapid-fire takedown. He does not hold back.
He really doesn't. He wants to show that when you try to explain away evil with just logic, you end up with a God who is either weak or ignorant or not actually good.
Let's run through a couple of these, because some are still super popular. He starts with dualism. The idea that the devil is just as strong as God and they're in this cosmic battle.
Packer dismisses that pretty quickly. He says, sure, the devil is real, but if God is sovereign, why does he let the devil loose? Dualism doesn't answer the why. It just shifts the blame and suggests God is sort of struggling to keep up.
Then he goes after Leibniz. I remember him from philosophy class, the best of all possible worlds guy.
Right. The idea that God, the super mathematician, calculated every possibility and realized that this world, even with all the horror, was the only way to allow for free will. Packer calls this Pollyanna-ish.
Pollyanna-ish. That is a polite way of saying it's delusional.
He argues it just ignores the reality of sin and judgment. It's too clean. He even references Voltaire's Candide, where Dr. Pangloss keeps insisting everything is for the best while the world is falling apart around him.
Right.
Packer says you can't look at real tragedy and just say, well, the math works out. It feels like a mockery of suffering.
Okay, what about some of the more modern ones, like Hegel or Process Theology?
Yeah, the idea that God is evolving with us, that evil is just growing pains for the universe, or that God is doing his best but isn't all-powerful. Packer has zero patience for this. He just says it denies God's sovereignty. If God is just trying his best, he's not God.
And John Hick. He's the soul-making guy, right?
Yeah, yes, universalism.
Yeah.
The idea that everyone gets saved in the end and evil is just the obstacle course to get there. Packer says it's full of unbiblical holes. It ignores the fact that the Bible warns some people might not be saved.
Right.
If everyone wins no matter what, then the whole drama of history and the reality of evil, it just loses all its weight.
He also takes a swing at Christian Science, the idea that pain and evil are illusions.
Yes, and he shares a little limerick to show how absurd it is.
Oh, I have it here. It's a classic. A Christian scientist of Deal once said, although pain isn't real, when I sit on a pin and it punctures my skin, I dislike what I fancy I feel.
It's funny, but the point is serious. You can't just think away evil. It's not realistic. Packer is a realist. He thinks denying pain is just another form of escapism.
Okay, so if all the intellectual answers fail, if we can't blame the devil or say it's for the best or pretend it's not real, what is left? This is where we get to the core of Packer's whole argument. He moves from the intellectual why to the practical how.
And this is the pivot to his holiness doctrine. If you want to understand Packer on evil, you have to get this one maxim. God's agenda in this world is holiness. Happiness is reserved for the world to come.
That is such a tough pill to swallow for our culture. I mean, we are obsessed with happiness. It's in our constitutions, our ads, our life goals. We treat happiness like it's the ultimate virtue.
Which is exactly why Packer thinks we struggle so much with evil. We think the goal of life is a vacation resort. Packer thinks the goal of life is a gymnasium.
A gymnasium, a place to work out.
A place of training. He points to Hebrews 12, which talks about God disciplining those he loves. Packer argues that ease and comfort, they don't produce moral maturity. Battling evil does. He believes we are here to be shaped, and that process involves resistance.
You don't build character sitting on a beach. You build it carrying a load.
Exactly. So he's saying if God's goal was just our immediate happiness, then yeah, evil is a scandal. It proves God failed. But if God's goal is to make us holy, to make us morally mature, then evil and pain are
What?
essential equipment.
Weights we lift.
In a sense, yes. And Packer always emphasizes the future hope. He says the full fruit of this whole battle is enjoyed in heaven. The unfairness now is temporary. The holiness is eternal. He's asking you to extend your timeline way beyond just this life.
Now, this all sounds very noble when we're talking about, a bad day at work or broken leg. But Packer doesn't shy away from the really dark stuff. He brings up the Holocaust, genocide. And honestly, this is where the gymnasium analogy feels like it might just break down for people.
It's where the conversation gets really hard. People ask, what about the 6 million? How does moral maturity justify that level of horror?
And Packer warns against what he calls the numbers game.
He argues that theologically 6 million deaths isn't a different kind of problem than one murder. If you can explain one innocent death under a sovereign God, the logic holds for 1 million. If you can't explain one, 1 million doesn't change the logic, it multiplies the emotional devastation.
But he goes deeper. He brings up the doctrine of total depravity.
Mm.
And this is where you might need to brace yourself because Packer's view of humanity is not flattering.
No, it is not. He holds a very strict reformed view. We tend to think of ourselves as basically good people who mess up sometimes. We grade on a curve. Well, I'm better than that guy. Packer argues the Bible says the exact opposite, that the human heart is corrupt from birth.
So when we ask, why do bad things happen to good people? Packer would essentially ask, are there any good people?
Exactly. His conclusion is, and he uses the word awful, that we have no idea how little we deserve kindness and how much we deserve judgment.
That's a heavy thought. It suggests our baseline expectation shouldn't be blessing, it should be judgment.
It is. He says the fact that we aren't all snuffed out instantly is an act of mercy. It's what theology calls common grace. The sun shines on the wicked and the good. We feel entitled to that sunshine, but Packer says we have no right to it. Every moment we have without judgment is a gift.
But there was a very important communication tip he gives here. He says, if you're talking to someone who's hurting or someone who's skeptical, you never, ever start with this judgment stuff.
That is crucial. He says you have to start with the gospel, with the cross. You establish God's love and his willingness to suffer for us first.
Yeah.
If you just start with, well, you deserve judgment, you make God sound like a monster.
Right.
You have to frame the judgment inside the context of a rescue mission.
Exactly. The cross shows that God isn't indifferent to evil. He actually absorbed it. He didn't
Wow.
just watch. He came down and got broken by it.
Precisely. And that gives him the moral authority to use pain because he's tasted it himself.
I want to touch on one more theological concept Packer brings in. The distinction between God's two wills. Because people always ask, if God allows evil, does he want it to happen? Did he want the Holocaust to happen?
This is the distinction between the preceptive will and the decretive will.
Okay, break that down for us. It sounds a little technical.
It is, but it's vital. The preceptive will is the law. The precepts, do not kill, do not steal. It's what God commands us to do. It reveals his moral character. Clearly, God does not want us to murder. He hates it.
Got it. So those are the rules posted on the wall.
Exactly. Then there's the decretive will. This is the decree, the plan. This is what God actually permits to happen in history.
So God commands do not kill, but in his decretive will, he allows a murder to take place.
Yes. And Packer says God is in charge of that decretive will. He permits people to disobey his preceptive will for reasons of his own.
That feels like a contradiction.
Yeah.
Why permit something you hate?
Usually to show the full ugliness of sin, or to bring about a greater good we can't see. And Packer uses the cross to explain this.
The ultimate example.
It's perfect. Think about it. The crucifixion was the greatest sin ever committed. Murdering the innocent Son of God, it went directly against God's preceptive will.
Do not kill, right?
But it was the absolute centerpiece of God's decretive will. It was planned from the foundation of the world to save humanity.
So the worst act of evil in history was also the greatest act of redemption.
Yes. And Packer uses that to argue that just because God permits evil, it doesn't mean he approves of it, but it does mean he has a purpose for it.
It creates a framework where we can say God is sovereign, but humans are still responsible. It keeps God on the throne without making him the author of sin.
Exactly. It stops us from thinking the universe is just spun out of God's control.
So, as we look back on this whole deep dive, we've gone from this spoiled modern mindset to the indulgent parent idea through the graveyard of intellectual excuses. And we've landed in this gymnasium of holiness.
It really challenges you to completely reorient your view of what life is even for.
It does. It shifts the question from, why is this happening to me, to what is this training me for?
And how can I handle this creatively with God's power?
It is not an answer that ties everything up with a neat little bow. It doesn't promise the pain will go away. Packer is very honest about that.
No, he doesn't promise relief. He promises purpose. And for a lot of people, meaning is more necessary than comfort. If you know the training has a point, you can endure the workout.
Which brings us to our final thought. We always like to leave you with something to chew on.
And here's what strikes me. If Packer is right, and our rights to a pain-free life are actually an illusion, just a product of modern thinking, how does that change the way you react the next time something goes wrong?
Right. When the car breaks down, or you get passed over for that promotion, or something much worse happens.
Yeah. Do you feel that cosmic resentment? Do you feel like the universe broke a contract with you? Or if you drop that expectation, does the problem of evil shift? Does it stop being a problem of God's mismanagement and start being an opportunity for that creative handling Packer talked about?
Does the problem exist in the sky, or does it exist in our expectations? That is a huge question to just sit with.
It changes everything. It changes how you face your Tuesday morning.
It really does. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the mind of J.I. Packer. It's heavy stuff, but hopefully it gives you a new lens to view the world.
Ideally, a lens of holiness, not just happiness.
Exactly. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.